and welcome to the History of Philosophy in China by Peter Adamson and Karen Lai, brought to you with the support of the Philosophy Department at King's College London and the LMU in Munich. Online at historyofphilosophy.net. Today's episode, Horse of a Different Color, the Mohists on Language and Knowledge. In some ways, the Mohists were more systematic thinkers than the early Confucians. This is not to say that the authors of the Analects Mengzi and Xunzi and of the Guojian texts were lacking in the power of persuasion when it came to proposing and defending their own views. Nor is it to suggest that the Confucians were unable to organize their ideas conceptually. They offered models, especially models of upright conduct, within their vision of ideal society. However, the Confucian commitment to rule by virtue is established on the assumption that there's no standard way for every person to achieve the same sagely standing. By advocating the implementation of standards, the Mohists sought reliable, reproducible methods for an ideal society, methods that should produce similar results for everyone. Actually, the use of standards or methods that yield reproducible outcomes is a feature of modern science. So perhaps we could think of the Mohists as budding scientists, as thinkers who episodically, rather than systematically, developed ways to investigate and understand the world. This has been suggested by an influential scholar of later Mohist thought, Angus C. Graham. By later Mohists, we mean the thinkers associated with 6 chapters of the Mozi, chapters 40 through 45. These chapters, called the Mohist dialectics, Mo Bian, are likely to have been composed during the late Warring States period, after the other chapters of the Mozi we've been discussing so far. The first 4 of these chapters form a set, the first 2 of which are called the canons, Jing. Each canon is made up of, at most, a few short, cryptic statements. The 180 canons state the scope of terms associated with how we use language, procedures of argument and disputation, measurement processes in geometry, optics, and mechanics, and Mohist views on virtue and leadership. These 2 canons chapters are paired with 2 chapters called explanations. Each explanation statement provides more detail on its corresponding canon statement. Then the final 2 chapters, number 44 and 45, are entitled the Greater Selection and Lesser Selection. These cover questions on ethics, semantics, and logic, with the lesser selection being the more coherent of the 2. These are not easy texts to work with. The 6 chapters are corrupt at many points, and in both the canons and explanations, statements are made without much attempt at clarification. In Canon A3, for instance, it is stated that the knowing is the capacity. This blunt phrasing, free of any elaboration, is typical of the canons. All it gives us is an equation between 2 terms. With hope and expectation, we turn to the corresponding explanation, which says, as to the knowing, it's that by which we know, such that we surely know, like eyesight. The analogy is a familiar one. Any number of philosophers throughout history have compared knowledge to vision, but this supposed explanation doesn't explain exactly how knowledge is analogous to eyesight, or for that matter, how this comparison might illuminate the canon's designation of knowledge as a capacity. In light of all this, it is difficult to state in precise terms what the 6 chapters of the Mohist dialectics set out to do, even if some of the discussions are enlightening and distinctive by the standards of a Warring States text. You can almost hear the tone of hard-won patience when modern-day Mohism scholar Chris Fraser remarks, interpretation of later Mohist doctrines can be testing. They must be reconstructed from terse, incomplete statements scattered about different parts of the corpus, and on some issues there is insufficient textual evidence to reach any firm conclusions. Still, they do provide valuable insights concerning how the early Chinese thought about language and argumentation. As we will see, their considerations delve much deeper into a more diverse range of topics as compared with the earlier chapters of the Mozi text, and indeed the other Warring States texts we've looked at. These later Mohist chapters also develop themes we saw in the first core chapters of the Mozi. For instance, the Greater Selection chapter covers the question of relationality in a way that references to jian'ai, or inclusive concern, in the earlier chapters of the Mozi did not. Here it is made clear that a person has significant responsibility towards specific others, such as rulers, the elderly, and parents. We know about the later Mohists and their contemporaries partly from attempts during the Warring States and later to group them according to the topics of their debates and their approaches to questions. One group of thinkers was known for their use of disputation to settle disagreements. They were called the bianzi, because the word bian means to dispute. In general terms, disputation is an argumentation process to determine who holds the correct view. It's a concept we find in other texts too, like the Xunzi, which states that it is important for the Confucian virtuous man, the Junzi, to engage in argumentation. But the Xunzi also distinguishes between the argumentation of the petty man, the argumentation of the well-bred man, and the argumentation of the sage. In another passage, the Xunzi calls out particular people, such as Hui Shi and Deng Xi, who engage in argument with the purpose of displaying their skills in disputation. The passage states, "They like to master strange arguments and to play with unusual expressions. They investigate things with extreme acuteness but without any beneficent intent, and they debate matters but provide no useful results. Nevertheless, they can cite evidence for maintaining their views, and they achieve a reasoned order in their explanations, so that it is enough to deceive and confuse the foolish masses. Just such men are Hui Shi and Deng Xi." The Shuangzi, a Taoist text from the late Warring States period that we'll be talking about later on in detail, also criticizes Hui Shi. It explicitly calls him a disputer or bianzi, accusing him of using his words to make a great display in the world, showing them off in debate, and all the debaters in the world shared his delight in them. Two other figures, Huan Tuan and Gongsun Long, are also named. These disputers are accused of covering over what is in men's hearts with their embellishments, altering their ideas, able to defeat their mouths but not to convince their hearts. This is the trap in which all such debaters get stuck. These few references suggest that the term bianzi was used in a pejorative sense, not for just one well-defined group, but to disparage a range of thinkers who were too clever by half in their argumentative strategies. Of course, we shouldn't just take these critics at their word. Nested in the criticisms are hints that the bianzi were focused on accuracy and on the processes of examining ideas and defending arguments. That sounds pretty good. But for the Xunzi and the Shuangzi, devoting one's mental energies to these issues eclipses the more important questions of virtue and ideal government. But is it really true that the bianzi and the later Mohists, who devoted their attention to questions about language and argumentation, had little to contribute when it came to practical matters? In fact, their discussions of language and how it helps or hinders our knowledge of the world raise questions about how language could be properly action-guiding. The Mohist dialectics demonstrate acute awareness that our understanding of the world is mediated by language. Language is, after all, like a kind of social glue, and can bring people together when they are able to effectively communicate. Conversely, language can be divisive. Around the time we were writing this episode, it suddenly became possible to signal one's allegiance in the American culture wars by calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So it was for good reason that a range of Warring States thinkers were deeply concerned about the power of language. To study the mechanics of disputation was, among other things, to study how language might be used to unify the people, or at the very least, to dispel discord. Alongside the later Mohists, we should take into account the views of a text called the Gongsun Long, which is probably somewhat later than the Mohist canons and explanations, and in fact seems to draw on them. The work bears the name of its alleged author, Gongsun Long, one of those whom the Shuangzi regards as a bianzi. It is best known for its argument, "White horse, not horse." Gongsun Long is shown defending this claim, even though it sounds obviously counterintuitive. How can a white horse not be a horse? The debate begins with Gongsun Long's opponent posing the question, "White horse, not horse, is this admissible?" And one likes to imagine his incredulous tone of voice here. Gongsun Long affirms his position. Indeed, white horse, not horse, it is admissible. A back-and-forth debate ensues, with Gongsun Long presenting a variety of defenses following his opponent's questions. The dialogue is complex, and we will not go into all stages of the argument here. To give you some idea how wide-ranging the arguments are, scholars have variously interpreted them with reference to concepts including universals, attributes, predication, logical classes, and grammatical categories. But one fairly straightforward way to make sense of Gongsun Long's position would center on the term fei, translated as not, in the phrase white horse, not horse. According to Lisa Indracolo, a scholar of early Chinese texts, fei has two subtly different meanings. First, as a negation, fei may apply to the question of being, that is, of existence. In this case, being a white horse is not being a horse. This sounds counterintuitive and is quite likely the way in which Gongsun Long's opponent, and some of us, understand the phrase. Secondly, though, fei may refer to the lack of similarity between a white horse and a horse. In this case, the point of the assertion is simply that a white horse is not the same as a horse. But this way, Gongsun Long's claim makes more sense. If white horse were the same as horse, then there'd be no such thing as a black horse or a brown horse. As Indrakolo points out, this makes sense of both Gongsun Long's and his challenger's claims. In fact, the two are effectively talking past one another. The challenger is thinking concretely of actual real-life animals that exist in the world. Imagine pointing at a white horse in a field and announcing, "Not horse." This would be ridiculous, no less than standing on the coastline of Louisiana, pointing out at the water and saying, "Not Gulf of Mexico." By contrast, Gongsun Long is not thinking about horses that are galloping out in the fields. His point is a linguistic one, that the words white horse and horse are not the same in meaning. After all, they may refer to different things in different circumstances. The second of Gongsun Long's arguments in the white horse debate shows how these two angles, the concrete and the linguistic, relate to each other. It poses a set of scenarios in which someone asks for a white horse and contrasts this with simply someone asking for a horse. If someone asks for a white horse, only a horse that is white will do, not horses of any other color. But if they ask for a horse of any color may be brought. The argument states, someone who seeks a horse will be just as satisfied with a yellow or a black horse. Someone who seeks a white horse will not be satisfied with a yellow or a black horse. Gongsun Long also turns this point against his opponent. Supposing that a white horse were after all a horse, what they seek would be one and the same. What they seek would be one and the same because the white would not be different from the horse. Gongsun Long's argument foregrounds the connections between words and things in the world, revealing that two words or phrases are only the same if they refer to exactly the same objects. This is an important point in the philosophy of language. Given the apparently absurd and pedantic example at the heart of the debate, you can see why others may have found this to be a vanity project, especially in light of the urgencies of the Warring States period. But the insight can be applied more broadly. In ethics, politics, and pretty much everything else, it's vital to ensure that words fittingly pick out the correct things in the world. Words name things in the world, and must perform this function well so that people can communicate and get on with life. Good luck to a cattle farmer who uses the same term for both oxen and buffalo. Nor was Gongsun Long the only one who was concerned about this. We've already seen how the Confucians urged the rectification of names, a project aimed at determining the meanings of words such as father and official, so that a person's behaviors could be benchmarked against what was expected of them in their roles. For the Confucians, this process would help establish standards for moral behavior and practices. Gongsun Long was thinking along the same lines by seeking to match words or names with their proper reference in the world. So we don't need to assume that the Bianzi set out to establish reliable correspondences between names in the world merely to show off their skills in wordplay and sophistry. And we're not just speaking of words such as horses or oxen, important though they were in the early Chinese context. Standardized meanings of evaluative terms, such as benevolence or benefit, shared by all within a community, might contribute to social and political stability. The Mohist dialectics share these views about the importance of language in guiding our practices and interactions. While the early Confucian texts sought to implement correct names, the later Mohists discussed the issues underlying the whole practice of naming. Their questions were more like the kind that technical experts, as we might call them, would ask. Parts of the text reflect on the complexity of trying to determine the meanings of names. This is not merely a matching exercise of each word to its corresponding thing. Rather, they are trying to determine the attributes of a thing so that a person can reliably identify it when they encounter instances of it. For example, what makes the moon this evening, a crescent-shaped moon, a moon? And what also makes a full moon a moon? What are the relevant attributes we pick out that consistently apply over all instances of this same thing, the moon? we need to work out what it is that both the crescent moon and the new moon have in common. This business of making distinctions correctly is a major theme in the dialectics. To help the process along, the dialectics consider how we think about sameness and difference. When we say two items are the same, we might mean, for example, that water and H2O are the same, as they pick out the one same object. Or we might mean that they belong to the same type, the way that both horses and oxen fall under the type animals. The dialectics list 4 types of sameness and 4 types of difference, with a level of precision that is unusual in texts of this period. In most cases, we don't have any trouble communicating with one another or using words to navigate the world. But what happens when we disagree? According to the later Mohists, this is where the process of disputation, bian, comes in. Unlike critics of the bianzi, the Mohists do not believe that disputation is mere wordplay. Instead, there's a criterion we need to apply, according to which the names should fit the facts. Those which are called by names are either the same or different. In one case, where they are the same, one person calls it a whelp, while the other calls it a dog. In another case, where they are different, one person calls it an ox and the other a horse. In each case, when neither person wins, it is because they have not engaged in disputation. In disputation, one says it is this, and the other that it is not. Whichever fits the fact is the winner. The remarks in the passage suggest a level of naivete regarding how we go about determining a word's appropriateness. But it also expresses the later Mohist concern that the words we use must not be arbitrarily and trivially connected with the world. The legitimacy and efficacy of names rests on their picking out relevant features of the world, allowing language users reliably and consistently to refer to what is out there. Here it becomes clear to us that the later Mohist views on language are intricately connected with questions about knowledge. According to the dialectics, in seeking knowledge there are 4 things we are after. The first is names, which as we have seen must be used correctly. The second is reality, that is, how things, events, and situations in the world really are. The third is matching, that is, ensuring that names correspond with reality. And the fourth object of knowledge is correct action. Here we might pause to recall a distinction we made in an earlier episode between knowing that and knowing how. For example, the difference between knowing that water is H2O and knowing how to swim. At first glance, it seems that the Mohists are interested only in knowing that. For example, we need to know that the word human means such and such and that the sun is such and such. But to know a name is also to know how to use that word when communicating, and how to refer to a given reality with a given name. The same goes for matching. To know whether words and reality match is to know how to distinguish types of things or events that are picked out by specific names. We've seen similar assumptions operating in one of Gongsun Long's arguments for white horse, not horse. If in practice only white horses can satisfy the request to bring a white horse, whereas a horse of any color can satisfy the simpler request to just bring a horse, it follows that white horse is not horse. Gongsun Long's argument is thus an instance of disputation over matching name with reality. Knowing names, realities, and knowing how to match them culminates in what is, for the later Mohists, the most important type of knowledge. This is practical knowledge, or more specifically, knowing how to act. This emphasis on practical knowledge is most clearly stated in an example in the Mozi, which considers whether we can say that a blind man knows the difference between black and white. Our master Mozi said, "Now the blind say, what's bright is white, what's dark is black. Even the clear-sighted have no grounds for changing this. But collect white and black things together, and make the blind select from among them, and they cannot know. So when I say the blind don't know white and black, it's not by their naming, it's by their selecting." Though the Mozi is emphatic that language has an instrumental role in our knowledge of the world, what is more important than what we say is what we do. On the basis of this passage, we can finally understand that apparently uninformative passage from the canons, which told us that knowledge is a capacity. To use the Mohist's own example, to say that someone knows black means that they are able to distinguish black things from white things and from non-black things more generally. According to this view of knowledge, for a person to know that the cup in their hand is white in color and not black requires that they can distinguish a white cup from a black one and from cups of other colors. Likewise, for them to know that the 4-legged animal in front of them is a dog requires that they can distinguish that animal from others that do not bear the name dog. One way this practically focused knowledge works is through a process of pattern recognition. That is, in knowing what a dog is, a person must be able to distinguish what makes all dogs, terriers, Alsatians, and Shibas, dogs. What are the common patterns these animals share that makes them dogs and not cats? Likewise, what are the similar attributes that all white-colored things share in being white? The pattern matching exercise works in such a way that a person is able to accurately identify all instances of white things as white. Perhaps we could even think of this as a third kind of knowing as. We can see that the aim of knowledge in the dialectics is not merely to seek the truth that is out there in the world. True, the later Mohists are interested in the process of matching word with reality, but that is only part of the picture. What's more important to them is how the knower acts. It seems from the illustration with the blind man that the capacity to make distinctions is inextricably bound up with knowledge, or perhaps even just the same as knowledge. This emphasis on practical knowledge differs significantly from one that understands knowledge just in terms of truth. The knower must be able consistently and reliably to make the distinctions that enable them to live effectively in the world. But of course, language isn't something we use on our own. Within a community, when people communicate, the names they use must reliably and consistently refer to the same thing. If everyone agrees what words refer to, that will be a big step toward harmony in the community. In fact, we can connect this concern with language use to the Mohist political theory. As you might remember, they posited that leaders have an important role in leading people away from a kind of state of nature, in which each person had their own views about what is right and what is wrong. The ruler, who models himself on heaven's standard, leads the people with a single standard, in particular with such names as benefit and righteousness. Perhaps those who were critical of the Bianzi couldn't see the deeper practical import of their views, as they were stumped by their technical discussions, or perhaps they were too impatient to bother with them, but we're not going to make the same mistake. Having explored their views of language in this episode, we're going to move on to think about another aspect of their theory of disputation, argumentative reasoning, or perhaps we could even go so far as to call it logic, but what's in a name? That's next time here on the History of Philosophy in China.